Dan Feigelson is currently a network team leader in the New York City schools, and Adele Schroeter is the principal of PS 59 on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. When the research for this article was conducted, Dan and Adele were co-directors of the Office of Research, Development, and Dissemination at the New York City Board of Education. They were instrumental in designing much of the professional development and many of the teacher support materials related to E-Class that were offered by the Board of Education at that time. So why don't we start out with me asking you, when you were with the board, what did you see as the purpose of E-Class?
We wanted to develop some common language, again, across a very big system. And our kids are somewhat mobile. Not transient, but mobile. Kids move from school to school because they move from one apartment to another, their parents moved, they change jobs, things like that. Even in a school like ours, recently we've had up to 20% of our kids are considered recent immigrants. And there's motion. And the notion that a kid could be going to school in Midtown Manhattan and move out to Park Slope, Brooklyn, and go to another public school and come with a portfolio that kind of said he's an E-Class level 4. It's obviously not a whole picture of the kid, but it is a snapshot of, like, here's where you can start. And accurate or not, refined or not, precise or not, here's about where he is. Yeah, here's about where he is. So that was sort of, I think that was my understanding of what the goal was.
I think, too, that it was, my sense of it always, and again, as we discussed, Adele actually did more work on this project than I did at the time, but that it was an attempt, there was and still is, some level of controversy around assessing little guys in any sort of standardized way. And my sense of the vision for E-Class was that it was an attempt at a more qualitative type assessment than what comes later, and that it was an assessment that was very much intended to inform instruction. That was what it was about. That the E-Class box was a set of tools and resources for teachers to use to make decisions about their kids, which ideally is what any assessment should be, but we all know that in upper grades it turns into something else. So I think the initial vision for it was a good one.
I think you covered a lot of it. Just two kind of follow-up points would be, do you think there was a concern about accountability? I think you addressed that a little. I don't know if you have anything else to say. And also, was it seen as a means of comparing achievement in primary grade reading in schools across the system?
So in its design, I don't think that was the intent, accountability or comparison-wise. Human nature being what it is, and large systems being what they are, and the people in different positions. You can tell a superintendent that this is not to be mandated, and I feel like the instructional folks at Central there was absolute clarity about the fact that this was not to be mandated, and it was not to be really collected and schools and teachers held accountable in that way. But so it became sort of this oddly unenforced mandate, which meant that superintendents and principals went back to schools, and if you don't have a lot of knowledge about primary instruction, and you're not in a community where people kind of hash things out and pull them apart and make sense of them, I think it kind of got interpreted the way it got interpreted, and I think it kind of I think in some schools it was sort of like, well, will people do it if it's not mandated? If I don't collect it, will it? And I have to say, in our school, and I'm sure in your school, we collect kids' reading levels. We do, and it's not about holding teachers accountable, but more about, like, who are our kids who look like they're in trouble, excelling, plateauing, like not growing in the way that makes us want to take another look. And I think with all the things that didn't go as intended or as planned, some of the conversations that grew out of it, even the resentful ones, were conversations that didn't happen before. Like, oh, she says he's a level this, but I see that he's a level this, and I think it was fairly unusual for classroom teachers to be running records, for example, at the time. I think that was the purview of a reading recovery teacher or an intervention specialist, and I think the fact that became like, common coin in a first or second grade classroom was an interesting conversation.
E-class.
And like anything else, you kind of start with an intention. It gets interpreted the way it does, but somewhere in the mess is disequilibrium. That time when you're very anxious, but during which a lot of learning occurs as well.
You want to add anything to that?
Just that, I think there's often a sort of mismatch, I guess, when you introduce a tool that's intended for teachers and gets taken over by bureaucrats who are not particularly instructional. And but I think, to Adele's point, it did stimulate some conversations that wouldn't have happened otherwise. If the people enacting the mandate get why it's important, see its value, have some voice in putting it together, have some voice maybe in when they'll get it done by, feel like they have a little bit of agency with it.
Right.
That's different than if it's coming from outside and, you're being given all the guidelines without any sense of purpose.
Right.
And I think,
so
that's
there
the
were
danger
too
of
many
Venice. And that's
layers
where we are
between
today.
intention and implementation.
Mm-hmm.
When you reflect back on it, is there anything you might have approached differently in terms of maybe the instrument, but also I know you designed a lot of the PD and the support, and not to imply there are any obvious elements that really could have been approached that differently, but I'm just interested in what comes to mind.
At that time, and this is not in any way passing the buck, we had just been teachers, and we were working in this office, and I think why we were brought there was to sort of supply a teacher's perspective. Neither of us at that point had any administrative experience at all, and we were thinking as practitioners. And the stuff that we were designing, the support materials, the yellow book for the E-class, the instructional guides that got some play, were intended to be resources for teachers. And we were not really, maybe a little later, but at least at first, we weren't really part of the conversations about the implementation, how it would be mandated in schools. So, I guess in hindsight, it depends if this is a theoretical hindsight or a practical hindsight. At that time, I'm not sure I would have known how to effectively administrate it. From my perspective now, I might have some feelings about it.